האם ברנדן מחובר? זה הכי חשוב.
שומעים אותך.
יש, אנחנו סוף סוף עולים לשידור, איזה כיף, וואו, כאילו, איזה הפקה ואיזה, כמה דברים קרו היום בשביל שהמצב הזה יקרה. Thank you so much for joining us, and hello, thank you and welcome. Welcome to the first digital single malt festival of Israel. My name is Tommy, I'll be your host for tonight. Every year we do a whiskey-related marketing activity to meet you guys, the whiskey lovers and fans of Israel, and to bring you tasting of our best whiskeys. And this year, despite the situation, we had to adapt quickly to the new situation. And here we are today. Each of you have a kit at home. It was not an easy task at all, but we did it. And it's such a great moment for me and us as a company of IBBLS. And some good happened in the edition. We can host very nice people who agreed to devote their precious time to enrich us with knowledge and wisdom. And today we have Brendan McCarran, and it's such a great pleasure to have you, Brendan. Brendan, you with us?
How you doing?
Hello, Brendan. Brendan, a little bit about yourself. You have lived in Isla for 3 years. You manage Oban Distillery that we have tasted here yesterday, and it was such a great treat. You work with Kaolaila, Lagavulin, and Port Helen. And now you're working with Glenmorangie as head of maturing whiskey stock from 2014. Is this right?
Yeah. So I've been making whiskey for 15 years.
Wow.
Various stages. Started off working in a maltings in Speyside, and then worked in blending in the centre of Scotland in Leven, and then I've been the manager of Oban, as you say, and then lived on Isla looking after maltings and distilleries. And now I have joined the Glenmorangie company 7 years ago almost, and my job now is to make Glenmorangie and Ardbeg in Scotch.
Wow. You and I met once before to talk about Glenmorangie Tale of Cake. And since then, you have a lot of fans here in Israel, and I'm number one. And it was such an amazing moment, and I said, I must to have you again here with us. And I want to say before we start, on behalf of everyone, thank you very much. I know you're a very busy man. Thank you for joining us today. I know it's not an easy at all. I will be here through the whole broadcast with you, and of course, questions, I can pass them in the end. Of course, if they write on chat in Hebrew, I will pass them to you. And thank you, and the stage is all yours.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. So good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to the tasting. As you'll probably see, I'm in my own dining room at home. So it's been a crazy year. But this year, we've still been making all of our whiskies, just doing it a little differently. I'm having lots of samples sent here to my house. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to have a bit of fun, actually. We're just going to have 3 incredible Glenmorangies. It's a little dark in here, the sun has gone away because it's winter, but we're going to have Lysanta, Quinta Ruban, and Nectar d'Or. So these are 3 of Glenmorangie's famously wood-finished whiskies. So we'll get right into the whiskey very, very, very soon. But I guess just to tell you a little bit about myself and a little bit about Glenmorangie. So my job is officially I'm the head of maturing whiskey stocks, which sounds very fancy. It's a very long job title, but I'm one of the whiskey makers. So I work in the whiskey creation team at Glenmorangie, and I help to make all of the whiskies that we send around the world. So I nose and taste whiskey most days. I purchase all of our casks, and I also purchase all of our malted barley for both distilleries. I make whiskies myself. Other times I make whiskies in the team. And my boss is Dr. Bill Lumsden, so a very famous name in the whiskey world. And Dr. Bill is our director of whiskey creation. And essentially he hired me 7 years ago to be his successor when the time comes. So whenever Bill decides to step down or pursue a new challenge, he wants me to become the next director of whiskey creation. So I'll be the next master distiller or master blender, if you like to call it that. So that's why it's me that's talking to you about these whiskies. That's why it's me that's tasting these whiskies with you. Normally, in a normal year, and we can all agree, I'm sure 2020 has not been a normal year. But in a normal year, I would be out there in Israel with you to sit down and talk about these whiskies, which is a shame. I really wish I was there, and I wish we could be in a room together having these whiskies. But we can't. But I've been doing this year, and I've got to admit, I was maybe a little cynical, but they really work. You know, I really love doing these Zoom connections and chatting about these whiskies that I love. So if you have any questions, just type in the chat. And Tommy will relay them to me live, and we'll just speak our way through this. The more questions you ask or the more comments you give, the more interactive this will be, and the more fun it will be. So let's begin. So I tell you what, rather than waiting for me to talk about the history of Glenmorangie, let's taste Glenmorangie Lasanta first. And then while you have a glass of Lasanta in your hand, I can give you some of the history of Glenmorangie while you then have a whiskey that you can enjoy. So, everyone, grab your first bottle, get your hands on your Lasanta, which is right here in my glass here. This is our 12-year-old sherry-finished whiskey, so you can see the kind of sherry colour there. You can see that nice depth, that nice darkness to this whiskey. If you have these glasses like me, these are nosing glasses, so it's always a good way to get the most out of a whiskey. You want to check the colour, get an idea of what kind of density, how dark or how light it is. Then just take a good nose. Just start to pick up the aromas of Glenmorangie. Now with Glenmorangie, we say it's kind of delicious, and it's because it's absolutely packed full of flavour. So Glenmorangie, every Glenmorangie you try, every expression is very complex, very full of flavour, lots of different things in there to discover. But yeah, so I mean, I know I'm biased, but it just smells amazing. It smells absolutely amazing. I'm going to take a little sip. We say cheers in Scotland, but we also say slanjava, which means to your health. So all I can see is my own face right now. So I'm hoping everyone's enjoying themselves, and I'm hoping everyone's got their glass. But yeah, for me, still in that beautiful sip, and you know, think about the texture, think about the initial flavours you get, think about how long the finish is on the whiskey. All of these things add up to how much you enjoy this whiskey, you know. So on the nose, I get so many different fruits. I get some citrus fruit, maybe some orange peel. I get some dried fruits. I get lots of sultanas and lots of raisins. I also get something slightly chocolatey that I can smell. That's a bit weird. I know you don't really smell chocolate, but there's something cocoa powder or something milky chocolate sweetness in there. And then on the sip, take a sip, I get chocolate from the very beginning to the very end of this whiskey. There's also a little bit of spiciness in there too, you know, so I get a little bit of cinnamon or star anise or even chili, you know, something that gives you a little bit of heat in there as well. So you please just continue enjoying your whiskey. If you want to, you can add a few spots of water to it, and it'll kind of change it a little bit. It'll open it up a little bit. It'll just let it develop a little bit. But what I would say is Glenmorangie, our distillery, is a Highland single malt Scotch. So if anyone out there is already quite a big fan of Scotch whisky, you will have heard of the regions of Scotch. So very famously, there's Speyside. Speyside being like a lighter style of whiskey, light and fruity, I would say. And then, of course, there's Islay, and Islay being, or island region, being usually more smoky and salty and maritime. The Highlands are harder to define as a category, but Glenmorangie, I would argue Glenmorangie is the most famous Highland single malt Scotch. And with our whiskey, what you get is you get that fruity, sweet and fruity note that you get in Speyside, but there's more to it than that. There's like a depth. There's an extra layer of flavour. There's an extra amount of aroma. There's added complexity, is what I'm trying to say. So there's a few things. Well, there's many things that allow Glenmorangie to be so flavourful, but a few things that I would really bring your attention to. We mash. So when we mash our barley, we're going to dissolve the sugar in there with water, just like every other distillery. But rather than using soft water like most distilleries use in Scotland, including our sister distillery, Ardbeg, but at Glenmorangie we use mineral water. So we use mineral water to make our whiskey. We have a natural spring that's only a kilometre from the distillery. So the water bubbles up out of the ground, and by the time it's got to the ground from an underground well, by the time the water hits the surface, it's picked up lots of mineral salts. So it's chalky and it's salty and it's mineralic. And as a result of that, it means that when we ferment, when we make our beer that we're going to distill into Scotch, it means that the fermentation is like super active. You know, there's a huge amount of science that goes into it, but I'll not bore you to tears. I do like my science, but I know that it kind of sends most people off to sleep when I go on and on and on about it. But the fermentation creates alcohol, but as well as alcohol, it creates flavour. So in this glass, see any aromas that you're picking up. If you're picking up anything citrusy, if you're picking up anything like stone fruits, if you're picking up anything floral as well, if you're picking up anything like pressed flowers or grass or something kind of meadow sweet and aromatic, all those flavours are created during fermentation. Now, after fermentation, we've created these delicious flavours that make Glenmorangie stand out. We want to make sure you can find them. And to find these delicious flavours, we want to remove any impurities. We want to remove anything that's like oily. We want to remove anything that's heavy. We want to remove any off notes and any sulphurs in particular. And to do that, Scotch whisky distillers use copper. That's why you always find pot stills in Scotland made of copper. But at Glenmorangie, we have the tallest copper pot stills. So our stills are enormously tall. They're actually very small in volume, so they're not big. They're small in volume, but they're hugely tall. And these big, tall copper pot stills mean lots of copper contact, and that means lots of purification. So it means removal of anything that's heavy, anything that's unpleasant, anything that's masking as well. So any bigger flavours that are going to hide all these delicious flavours, they all get removed by these tall copper pot stills. These pot stills are the same height as an adult male giraffe, for anyone that was wondering how tall is tall. They're about 17 foot tall, just the necks of the stills, about 17 foot tall. So, the spirit of Glenmorangie that we use to make all three whiskies that we're tasting tonight together, it's the same for all three whiskies. It's fruity, it's floral, it has a sweet maltiness to it, and really it's almost like a smell of strawberries and apricots that I get when I check the New Make Spirit, which I get to do every week. I actually have to do it on a Saturday at the moment because of COVID. So it's a bit of a pain having to work on a Saturday, but no one really feels very sorry for me because I spend my day nosing and making sure that our spirit is perfect. So it's a pretty cool job. I can't lie. So that spirit just kind of belongs. It belongs in American white oak. So the first 10 years that we make our whiskey, we mature it in ex-bourbon American white oak barrels. So for 10 years, all of these whiskies just mature gently for 10 years in ex-bourbon barrels. Ex-bourbon is going to add, if you're getting in here any flavours of honey, if you're getting any vanilla, if you get any creme brulee, if you get any white sugar, all of those kind of flavours are coming from the ex-bourbon barrels. And if you want to see what ex-bourbon Glenmorangie on its own tastes like, go out and buy a bottle of Glenmorangie Original, our 10-year-old flagship offering, my favourite Glenmorangie of them all. And you'll pick up all those classic American oak flavours. But that's not what we're drinking tonight. Sorry, I've just got something under my glasses. You'll need to excuse me. Tonight we're tasting the finishes. So what we do at Glenmorangie, we pioneered a technique called wood finishing. And it's to introduce the flavours of sherry or the flavours of port or the flavours of other wines into our whiskey, but without them dominating. So as I've said, Glenmorangie is a light, fruity, floral and flavourful, delicious spirit. So if we were to mature exclusively in sherry barrels, like some of our competitors, the sherry would dominate. The sherry would just take over everything that Glenmorangie is trying to create. So instead, what we do is we give it 10 years in ex-bourbon, and then we give it 2 years in the sherry casks. So that's what you have right here with Glenmorangie La Santa. 10 years in ex-bourbon, and then 2 years in sherry casks. We use Oloroso sherry. So if anyone's familiar with sherries, Oloroso is kind of like a medium rich. It's a medium rich sherry. It has flavours of dried fruits. It has sultanas. It has flavours of brown sugar. It has flavours of Christmas cake. All these kind of flavours, and those flavours go right into the whiskey. That's why if anyone's getting it, if you get some brown sugar in there, or perhaps if you get some sort of fruit loaf, like fruit loaf, or if you get any kind of Christmas cake notes in there, it's amazing. Now, you also might notice it's very chocolatey, so I've already said that, but it's also very soft and it kind of coats the entire mouth. And to do that, we also use some Pedro Jimenez sherry casks. So Pedro Jimenez is the darkest of all sherries. It's dark, it's sticky, and it's extremely sweet. It's known as the king of sherries. You can pour it over ice cream. It has that kind of thickness and that sweetness. So we use about 75% Oloroso, 25% Pedro Jimenez. And when you bring them together, that's when you get that kind of combination of fruity, citrusy, but also chocolate, and also it's almost like chocolate covered raisins that I get when I drink La Santa. Super mouth coating as well. We changed the recipe to introduce some Pedro Jimenez about 6 years ago, and we've never looked back. It's a recent winner of the best Highland single malt Scotch in the world was La Santa, won that at the IWSC, and it's just a fantastic whiskey. So if there's anyone out there who drinks Macallan or who drinks Aberlour or who drinks Glendronach, then this is the whiskey for you. This is the whiskey for you. It's that classic sherry flavoured notes that you expect from sherried Scotch, but with this wonderful, delicious array of flavours in there too. There's just so much brown sugar in there. There's so much like brown sugar and even like macadamia nuts and all sorts of things going on in here. So I said earlier, if you want to add water, then a few drops of water in here drops the alcohol, so it changes the texture, but it also means that a lot of flavours that were dissolved in the alcohol sort of come out, and they come out in its solution, they come out to play, and you can pick them up. A little bit of water into La Santa. You're going to drop back the dried fruits and you're going to drop back the spiciness, and you'll actually bring out more of a kind of peaches and poached pears and crisp green apples, and even something slightly floral will start to emerge if you put some water into this whiskey right here. So, Tommy, I don't know if you're still there. I'm literally just seeing myself on a slight delay here. But are you enjoying your Lasanta? I think Tommy's enjoying
actually,
it.
This is my favorite one actually so far, I think. And I've been drinking this for the past hour because, we have an hour delay between the sessions. But man, this is so delicious. It's so aromatic and so smooth in your mouth. It's actually really amazing. And the thing you added about the casks, I didn't know it actually. Pedro Jimenez. Yeah.
So there's actually quite a good story to that, Tommy, where we used to make Lasanta just using Oloroso, and it was great. It was fantastic, and people loved it, and it won many awards. But there was one problem: when you just use Oloroso, it can be quite dry, and dry is good, but sometimes it could be just too dry. So it kind of just sort of stopped, and that was it. There was all this flavour, and then it just stopped. So we wanted to kind of increase the roundness of the whiskey. We wanted to increase the mouthfeel. We wanted to increase the oily viscosity. So that's where we started working with Pedro Jimenez. Now, we were thinking, how much Pedro Jimenez do you use? Do you use 5% Pedro Jimenez? Do you use 10%? Do you go 50-50? Is it half Oloroso, half Pedro Jimenez? We didn't know, so we did experimentation, and we did lots and lots and lots of experimentation. And the answer we arrived at was 75% Oloroso, because Oloroso still just gives that wonderful, spicy, impactful, frankly, sherry-flavoured punch that you want when you pick up a sherried single malt Scotch. But 25% Pedro Jimenez was what really added without taking away, if that makes sense. It gave stuff to the Oloroso, but it didn't start to dominate and change the whiskey. Now, we then went to Jerez, myself and Dr. Bill, to buy new sherry casks. And Dr. Bill was explaining this to Miguel Martin, one of our sherry suppliers, and he was explaining, it's 75% Oloroso, 25% Pedro Jimenez. And he went, oh yeah, like a cream sherry. And we were like, sorry, what do you mean? Because we all know cream sherry. Cream sherry is very famous. Bristol's cream is very popular in the UK. And we were like, sorry? And he's like, that's what cream sherry is. Cream sherry is 75% Oloroso and 25% Pedro Jimenez because it works so well together. So we didn't know that, but we almost figured out how to make cream sherry just completely without any knowledge from the sherry suppliers. But it works for us, and it works for Lasanta, and it makes an amazing whiskey.
Let me tell you, Brian, I never been a sherry fan because it's always been too dry for me. I always prefer American oak. Like, I really enjoy this vanilla, toffee, caramel kind of tasting, and always sherry was too intense for me. But this one is very balanced, is very sweet, it's very fruity. Like you said, it's have no of this dryness in the end, a little bit of spice coming up, but it's very balanced. That's why I think it's my favorite sherry so far, definitely.
Love it. So now we've had sherry, and hopefully people are picking up the idea of you take 10 years of Glenmorangie and bourbon and then 2 years in sherry, and you pick up all those huge flavours. The next one I want us to try is our new 14-year-old Kim to Ruban. I'm not going to hold stuff up to the camera too much because I've got like a tiny delay, and it's weird. It's like seeing into the future, so it's putting me off. But this is our 14-year-old Glenmorangie Kim to Ruban. You'll see it's green and white, and I don't know if there's any Halpo Tel Aviv fans watching tonight, but we've played you a few times, Glasgow Celtic, and it's kind of Glasgow Celtic colours. So for that reason, I love this whiskey because it's green and white. But this one is... The actual reason it's green is because it's Portugal. It's symbolic of Portugal, and it's the ruby red port casks of Portugal that we use to make this whiskey. So again, we're taking that mineral distilled Glenmorangie with that super flavourful aroma that comes from it, maturing it firstly in ex-bourbon barrels and then finishing it in port barrels. So up until very recently, this was a 12-year-old single malt Scotch, which would be 10 years in bourbon and 2 years in ruby port. But we've changed it to a 14-year-old. So now it's most of its life in bourbon and a few years in the portwood. Some of it's in the port for 4 years, some of it's in the port for 3 years, some is in for 2 years. It's just a way of keeping the flavour profile consistent. Now, a few things. The first thing that makes me fall in love with Quinta, and I love this whiskey so much, is the colour. It has this crazy orange, pink and purple colour that's pretty unique for a single malt Scotch. I mean, look at that. If you weren't sure what was in the glass, this could be a red wine. This could be almost like a Chianti. This could be a Muscatel, or it could be some kind of botrycized dessert wine. It could almost be like a Paolo Cortado sherry as well. But it's not. It's a single malt Scotch, and it's that port that's brought in this incredible colour. It's really quite unique and stunning colour. So let's try. Going to go slightly up in alcohol now. So the Lasanta was 43% alcohol. This one's up just a little bit to 46% alcohol. And the reason we've done that is it just works right for us. You know, we find that it promotes more of the sherry flavour, the port flavour at 46, and the Lasanta promotes more of the sherry flavour at 43. There's no other reason than that. But again, you've checked the colour. I've gone on and on and on about the colour. I always do that. When I taste Quinta Ruban, I get obsessed with just like how amazing the colour looks in the glass, and I'll never tire of looking at that. But colours there, beautiful, beautiful, bold purples, oranges and pinks. Get your nose in there and think about how this whiskey has changed by being 2 years older, but mainly by being in a different kind of fortified wine. This port. Wow. So I hope you're enjoying. If you do have questions, make sure you're just putting them in the chat. Tommy will pick them up and we can answer them as we go. But with this one, so all Glenmorangies are very complex. And when I say complex, I mean they have like a huge range of flavours. There's so many different things to discover. But with the Quinta, it's actually a little bit more targeted. I would say there's 3 or 4 big primary flavours, and then there's some other flavours that sort of emerge and come out underneath. And for me, the first one is dark chocolate. I just get aroma, flavour, even texture of sort of really high cocoa, super dark chocolate. It's almost powdery feeling on the palate as I drink Quinta. So dark chocolate, and then I've just taken another sip. There's also honey in there as well. A lot of honey in this whiskey. And you might be thinking, yeah, we don't really need you on the call to know that. You know, there's honey in every single malt Scotch, pretty much. You always get a honey flavour, but it's like a significant honey flavour. It's almost like solid, you know. It's like beeswax or wild honey or something like that. It just stays there and it just develops and evolves on the palate. This rich, sweet, delicious honey note, and it just goes perfectly with the dark chocolate flavour as well. It's not so citrusy, which is quite a big thing for Glenmorangie. Glenmorangie is always usually fruity and floral because that's our spirit, but the citrus isn't in there straight away. It takes a little bit to come out, and it's maybe almost like an orange. You know, there's again that orange. It's almost like marmalade or orange infused honey that's in there. And then last one, so do this with me. I hate telling people how to drink their whiskey. You know, drink it any way you want, but just try this. Honestly, it doesn't take long. Just a little experiment. What we need to do is take one tiny sip. So take a little sip, swallow the whiskey, and then just have your mouth open and think about the flavour that starts to come across the top of the palate. So give that a go. One little sip. And you can feel it, it's almost cooling your mouth down, but rolling across the top of my palate. What I get this kind of mentholic note. So it's almost like chewing on a few fresh sprigs of mint, or there's a bit of eucalyptus or menthol in there, and it's amazing. I'm obsessed with the flavour of mint. Mint's like my favourite flavour on earth, so that's why I have a particular affinity to the Quinta Ruban. if you want to add some water to Quinta Ruban, it really changes. I would say this is one of the single malt scotches that changes the most with just a few spots of water. So a few spots of water to me, the dark chocolate's still there, but it drops back a little bit. But what happens is it goes so floral. The floral notes and the aromas of herbs and the aromas of being outdoors just go through the roof to me. So you add just a few spots of water in here, which I'm just doing right now. And it's just a few spots, so it won't change it too much in terms of what it looks like in the glass. But you know that honey I talked about earlier? It's now like lavender honey. So it's like lavender honey. There's some star anise coming through. Some flowering blackcurrant is in there as well. Oh, it's even something almost like, you know, that kind of powdered dessert, like Turkish delight or something in there as well. It's just, yeah, it's such an incredible change to a whiskey. I don't know which one I prefer. I don't know if I prefer it neat or if I prefer it just a few spots of water. I love it both ways. One's a little bit deeper and a little bit more focused, and that'd be the neat whiskey. And then this one's like, it's more of like a journey, and there's more interesting things to find around every corner. Really incredible whiskey. Now, I always say this, so I'm like a broken record. So I'm sure, ladies and gents, I can't see you, so I'm sorry if I'm not connecting with you as well. But I know we will meet eventually one time. This will all be over soon, and I'll get to come to Israel. And I love speaking about these whiskies, but I always say this with Quinta. Quinta Ruban to me is the only whiskey you should use when you're making an old-fashioned. So old-fashioned's my favourite cocktail. I'm not sure it'll ever be beaten, but I just love old-fashions, and I've been lucky enough to try them in some of the best bars on earth with some of the best cocktail makers, and there's many different ways I love it. There's very few ways that I don't love it. But Quinta Ruban to me, if you can get Quinta Ruban and orange bitters really helps. Quinta Ruban, orange bitters, make an old-fashioned, and yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. It just tastes like liquefied chocolate orange, and I'm actually quite tempted to just go away and make one right now, but I'm here with you, and also it's Monday, so probably a bit much to have an old-fashioned right now. But stick with me, keep that. If you can go away from here with one thing to try, it's make yourself an old-fashioned using Quinta Ruban, orange bitters, and then just follow the standard recipe. Mm-hmm. And you're welcome.
In our first floor in the office, now I'm in my office, yeah? So in the first floor, there is a huge London-style bar, and I think the next thing I'm gonna do after you finish to talk with us, I'm going downstairs to make me a nice old-fashioned with orange bitters. Thank you so much. It's a good plan.
Give it a go. It's up to you. So the other thing that sometimes works is the garnish. So sometimes if you use the orange peel as a garnish, I think that works great. But also with some cherries. So if you get some sweet cherries in there, yeah. So go and try it. And Tommy, let me know what you think when you try it. Let me know what you find.
We will.
Oh. Now, Tommy, has there been any questions come in yet? I'm more than happy to answer a few, or are we keeping them till the end?
We're trying to keep them till the end. We have 10 minutes in the end for a Q&A, so I'm just going to gather all the questions that are relevant and pass you on.
Sure, no problem. Well, you know, it's weird. It goes by so quickly, but we're on to our last whiskey. So, and don't forget, go back and check the whiskies that you've already had. You know, now that you can compare them, you can really start to pick up the changes and the differences in what's happened. So the last of the three wood finish whiskies that we're going to try together is called Nectar d'Or. So this one here is Nectar d'Or. This is I will say it's our most special wood finish whiskey. So this one, we make it in the smallest batches. We make it in the smallest amounts. We can never make enough. We just can't. It sells out every year quicker, and people want more of it. But we're very limited in our supply of Nectar d'Or, And the reason we're very limited in our supply is because we use Sauterne dessert wine casks to make this whiskey. So Sauterne, if you're not familiar, is a dessert wine from Bordeaux. So Sauterne is situated near the sort of Dordogne River, and in the microclimate around there is conducive to the formation of botrytis. Botrytis being a bacteria, more commonly known as noble rot. So what it does is the botrytis attacks the grapevines, and it kind of steals the water that was meant for the grapes. So when botrytis attacks grapevines, the grapes on the vine actually look like they've died. You know, they look like they've rotted, to be honest. Doesn't sound very pleasant, I know, but the grapes look like they've rotted away. But the story goes, which is probably heavily touched by marketing, but the story goes that back in the day, the peasants had nothing else that they could work with. If they couldn't use the grapes to make wine, they were going to starve. So what they thought was, we'll try and make this wine and just try and sell it on the cheap, and hopefully we'll get away with it. And then next year, hopefully this horrible fungus doesn't attack our grapes. But what they did, what happens is when the grapes were attacked by the noble rot, by the botrytis, it meant that the grape juice was super concentrated. So because the water wasn't getting there, the concentration of sugar had gone up and up and up and up. So that when they squeezed the grapes, rather than a liquid like water coming out, it came out almost like a syrup. And then to that syrup, you add yeast, and the yeast starts to ferment and to make a wine, but it can't process all of the sugars. It can't ferment all of the sugar. Eventually, the yeast stops working, and then it leaves behind this beautiful wine that's full of sugar. It's very syrupy. It's very decadent. It's full of flavours of like marmalade and syrup, and even some tropical fruits like pineapple and mango. These are all classic flavours of Sauterne wines. And then those wines are matured in French oak casks to give them an additional flavour and to allow them to develop and to mature. So probably the most famous, well, definitely the most famous Sauterne is one of the most famous wines on earth, which is Chateau Yquem. And we use Chateau Yquem casks, but we use other Sauterne as well. But these casks are something very special. And the Sauterne region is tiny. So every year I would like to buy something like 2,000 to 2,500 wine barriques, Sauterne wine barriques, but usually I get less than 1,000. Sometimes I get 500. There's no prediction to it. Noble rot doesn't happen everywhere every year. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't, and it's a naturally occurring phenomenon. So the production of Sauterne is up and down and up and down. But basically, I buy every single cask that's on the market, and I bring it to Scotland, and I use it to make Nectar d'Or. So the first two whiskies we tried, the Lasanta and the Quinta, big casks. Port is a big wine. Sherry is a huge wine. They kind of deepen and intensify and caramelize and, make everything more significant in the whiskey. Nectar d'Or is one where we've actually taken the whiskey and added quite a lot of lighter elements, sweeter elements, really sort of enhanced the sort of classic house style of Glenmorangie in a way. So it sort of goes in a different direction from the Lasanta and the Quinta. So let's try it. It's again at 46% alcohol. 10 years in bourbon, 2 years in Sauterne barriques. I just put my nose in there, and the first thing I get it every time, but I've just got, it's like vanilla wafers. So vanilla wafers and some grated lemon on top of it. Just this lovely dusting of lemon powder almost. So much vanilla in there as well. So much vanilla, and this kind of cakey pastry and wafer sweetness all coming through in the nose. It smells a bit like a baker's, like a patisserie. Take a sip if you haven't already. I'm sure you have. If you haven't, you're more patient than me. I'm impressed. But cheers, Slanjava. So, it is sweet, isn't it? It is sweet. It has lemons. It has a little bit of ginger and honey mixed together, and maybe a touch of lemon. But also, it's not just sweet. It's not just sweet. It's a little bit dry and a little bit spicy, isn't it? It packs a punch. There's lots of ginger. I get this analogy in my head. I get this picture in my head, I should say, not an analogy. I taste white chocolate from the whiskey, but I also taste white pepper. So I get this picture of like a little slab of white chocolate and someone just putting lots of white pepper on top of it. So creamy and sweet and delicious, but also a lovely spicy dry note that comes in there as well. And the reason for this is it's because the casks are made of French oak rather than American oak. So the other whiskies we've tried are American oak cask, but this one, French oak, is full of tannins. So what's happening is the 2 years in the Sauternes cask, the actual Sauternes wine is sweetening up an already very sweet whiskey in Glenmorangie. So that's why it's adding pineapple and it's adding baked lemons and it's adding pears and it's adding honey. But at the same time, the French oak is adding tannins. And tannins, you taste them by, it adds structure, it adds dryness, and it adds spiciness to the whiskey. So it's this perfect balance of sweet and dry that happens over the 2 years in the Sauternes cask that we love about this whiskey. And we have to be very strict about the time. We can't leave Glenmorangie in the Sauternes cask for too long, or it can kind of go over the top. It gets far too sweet and far too dry, almost astringent if you're not careful. There's a lot of skill goes into making this whiskey, and we love the end result. But as I say, we're limited by how many Sauternes barrels we can buy, and there's never enough. There's never enough. So again, if anyone wants to add water to this, please be my guest. I drink this one neat. I think this is at its absolute best neat, or really, honestly, 1 drop of water. No more than 1 drop of water is what does it for me. Too much water, I think what you do is you kind of, but metaphorically, I'm not talking literally, but you kind of wash out the tannins when you add water. So what that does is it takes away the spiciness, and that spiciness is bringing balance to the whiskey. So when you wash that away, it just becomes too sweet. It just becomes sweet and nothing else. For me. Now, if you like it with water, it just means you have a sweeter tooth than me. And there's nothing wrong with that either. It's great over ice as well. Just like 1 rock of ice. That's a good in-between step for me that sort of keeps that balance, keeps that decadence. I mean, that's if I had a word for this whiskey, it's decadent, you know? It's not an everyday, every time drinking whiskey. It's something that's kind of like a little bit of a treat, and it's just something that's a little bit special. And it's called Nectar d'Or, which means golden liquid of the gods. So you can kind of see what we thought about this whiskey when we made it by the name that we gave it. I should add that Nectar d'Or has been put in new packaging. So it used to be a 12-year-old single malt scotch, 10 years in bourbon, 2 years in Sauternes. These days, you won't see an age on it. So it's now a non-aged whiskey, but we haven't changed the recipe. It's made exactly the same way as it always was, which might sound crazy. Some people might say, well, why have you not put the age on it then? And it's because we were confusing people, frankly. People were getting very confused about what Nectar d'Or was. And really what Nectar d'Or is a story of Glenmorangie finished in Sauternes. And that's what's important. The 12 years is not what's important. The time in the Sauternes versus the time in the bourbon is not what's important. It's the Sauternes that's important. That's what makes it more expensive, frankly, because Sauternes is very expensive cask to buy. That's what makes it quite rare, because we're limited by the size of the Sauternes Appellation, which is tiny. That's why you won't see the age. But if you get your hands on an old Nectar d'Or batch and you try this, it's the same recipe. It's the same whiskey. Just got loads of, you know, those sort of little caramelized sugar sticks that you get sometimes to stir into tea or coffee in quite fancy restaurants or whatever. I've got that kind of slightly caramelized, crystallized sugariness. And then, of course, I'd never get my head around it. It's always this white chocolate with white pepper on top of it as well. And it's interesting. So most of these tastings, Quinta tends to be my favourite, but there's sometimes I go on a crazy sherry kick, and La Santa becomes my favourite. But tonight, just tonight, it's my palate. It's the temperature outside. Maybe it's the day I've had. I don't know, but this is the one that's showing up the best for me tonight. Is the nectar. It's nearly gone. In fact, it's going to be gone right now. Lovely. Tommy, how'd you find it?
Wow. This is such a treat. Every time I'm enjoying so much to drinking, and there are some parties to comparing three of those, like even to pick up the first glass and smell it again, and then to smell the second one is such a treat because they're so different right now. Because when you sometimes drink something for too long, it's kind of disappearing and melting to each other, but when you're comparing the three glasses again, it's like so different from the first time you touched them, and it's such a treat. Thank you so much. And we have some great questions if you like to hear.
Yeah, please.
So
bring it on.
First, there's a good question here, and I kind of know the answer already, but maybe you can tell us. As a guy who worked with the Lagavulin distillery and spent some time on the Isla and for Carl Ila and Diageo, and now you are always working with Arbeg as well. There's any plans for making Glenmorangie a little bit more smokier in the future?
So no. So I'm very honoured and very privileged to be one of the whiskey makers, but I think it's important to remember that you're merely a custodian of a whiskey. You're not completely in charge. So yes, I get to pick new batches or develop new flavours, but there's still like a beating heart at every distillery all around the world. There's still a classic house style that's been developed over hundreds of years. So I think it would be very arrogant and also very wrong of me to make Glenmorangie smoky overnight. But maybe as like one-offs and special editions, we'll add a little bit of smoke to Glenmorangie. And we actually have one now permanently available. We've made a 16-year-old, slightly smoky Glenmorangie called The Tribute, and it's available in travel retail. So hopefully next year, if things sort of I get back to something that feels a little bit more normal, whenever you're flying to go on holiday or you're flying for business, you will see a 16-year-old Glenmorangie called The Tribute, which has a little bit of smoke in it. But to change the house style, no, we won't do that. And I don't think I would ever do a Glenmorangie with the smoke levels of an Ardbeg or a Lagavulin. It's just too much. It's too much, it's too strong, it's too dominant. It would take over everything. But maybe as a one-off.
Thank you, Brendan. We have another good question about comparing Glenmorangie Nectar d'Or to Tale of Cake.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about the difference?
Yeah. So it's absolutely meant to be similar, and there are some similar notes in there, but the differences are, of course, Tokai is similar to Sauterne, but it's different. And Tokai, generally speaking, is more of that luscious pineapple note. And to me, Sauterne is more of the kind of marmalade kind of flavour. So there's more of these kind of brighter tropical fruit notes in the Tokai, which then translates right into the whiskey. And Tale of Cake is way more pineapple-y than Nectar d'Or. And secondly, it's the casks. So it's French oak to make Sauterne, it's Hungarian oak to make Tokai. Both of them are Quercus robur, so European oak, but where they grow changes the levels of, it changes the structure of the oak and it changes the tannins. So there's less tannins in Hungarian oak, and as a result, it's less of that kind of punch that Nectar d'Or has. You won't find white pepper in a cake, really, and you won't find white pepper in a Tale of Cake. It's more of the kind of syrup and pineapple and pastry notes that you get. So similar, but actually quite different as well.
Team? Thank you. There's a good question as well. What do you think about bottling in high ABV, let's say above 50% of alcohol? What is the meaning of high ABV actually in bottles?
Yeah, high ABV works for some whiskies, in my opinion, and it doesn't work for others. And frankly, it doesn't really work for Glenmorangie. So there's a lot of people who want higher ABV Glenmorangies, but to me, Glenmorangie is this kind of big open flower with all these different aromas to discover. And as the strength goes up, as the ABV goes up, it can close, you know. And you can actually have this quite closed, quite tight flavour experience. I guess something similar to, like, if there's anyone who drinks red wine, if you can imagine having a beautiful, fragrant red Burgundy, you know, that's spectacular, but it's served out of the freezer. You know, temperature can really affect wine. Strength can do the same to whiskey. So with Glenmorangie, when they're higher strength, they can get quite tight. Now, if you want to try Glenmorangie at a higher strength, one of the whiskies that really works is Glenmorangie Astar. So Astar is been made in a couple of batches. The first batch of Glenmorangie Astar was 57.5% alcohol, so basically cask strength whiskey. I made the second batch of Astar in 2017, and it was at 52.5% alcohol. And it's lovely, and it's a great expression of how that whiskey should be, but I still prefer it with water. I still prefer adding water to Astar, and you can almost see the whiskey opening up and kind of revealing more to discover when you bring it down. Now, I also make Ardbeg, so it's definitely not a financial decision, although some cynical people will think that it is. But Ardbeg, when you make Ardbeg higher ABV, what it does is it keeps the smoke in the whiskey. You know, because the more alcohol there is there, the more smoky flavour there is. So with Ardbeg, we tend to make them higher strength because it keeps the smoke in. But with Glenmorangie, it doesn't really work. It doesn't work for me. 40 to 46 is like the best kind of strength for Glenmorangie.
Cool. We have another cool question about your glass you use. And it's a debate I always like to open with my friends about how do you taste whiskey and how do you drink whiskey. So maybe you can give us some little bit of tips about the difference between tasting whiskey in a tasting glass and drinking whiskey and stuff like this.
Yeah. So again, great question. These questions have been fantastic. So see these, I use these at work. I use these they are nosing glasses. So by having this kind of tulip shape, you know, so I'm trying to keep out of the way of the writing. So having it a little bit wider here and a little bit thinner here, what it does is it promotes, it's going to have to do that, it promotes the flavours to gather about here. So it's designed for nosing. So it's absolutely designed, and I use these for work. I use these to make sure that every batch of whiskey is perfect, or every batch of whiskey meets the specification, or if there's anything wrong with the whiskey, which is rare but happens, this makes sure that I can find it and I can work out what's wrong and how to fix it. For drinking, these aren't important. You know, they're nice. They're nice. I do drink out of them from time to time, but they're not very good for adding ice. For example, if you want to add ice, they're nosing glasses. So for drinking whiskey, what I would say is don't overcomplicate it. See if you have a nice tumbler, that's perfect. See if you have any kind of glass, it's perfect. You don't need these glasses if you don't have them. They're great to have. They look cool, don't get me wrong, but they're very important for nosing if you're doing it for a living. But if you're drinking whiskey, most important thing about whiskey is just drinking it and enjoying it. And having it with friends, I would be more insistent that you drank whiskey around other people to get what they think in it. There's a real camaraderie to it. I'd say that's way more important than it being in one of these glasses.
There's a good question about the Signet, about the 18-year-old version of it. Can you tell us about it?
The 18-year-old version of Signet, did you say?
Yes?
There isn't one. So I can tell you nothing about that because it doesn't exist.
But I know Signet have such a nice story of development, and it's such a great product. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit about Signet as well?
There's so much to tell. I mean, maybe we should do another tasting with Signet, but very short. Signet is one of the most complicated products we make, but it's the most innovative whiskey we make, and it's really special. So we use highly roasted chocolate malted barley. So we change the barley we use at the distillery. We make it 1 week of each year. We change the spirit character of Glenmorangie. We mature it in all kinds of casks, and it's multi-vintage. So there's some old whiskey in there and some very old whiskey in there to create, and it creates a whiskey that just tastes of coffee and of chocolate, of honey, of tiramisu. Frankly, it's like espresso and like roast coffee beans, like intensely rich, really aromatic, and it's also super thick as well. It's this oily, massive, incredible whiskey. Very different for Glenmorangie. So Glenmorangies tend to be quite bright and light and out there, and this one's a bit deeper, and it's like the dark side of Glenmorangie.
And then we have a final question. What do you think about the independent bottlers industry that really spreading around the markets and doing interesting work around the world?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, independent bottling is nothing new. They've been around for a long time, and they're very skillful. You know, it's a great business. People can get their hands on casks, and they tend to have the opportunity to release in single casks, so it gets to show off the individuality of certain distilleries sometimes in a way that, you know, we do from time to time as well. So yeah, independent bottlers are great. You know, it's a bit strange right now that some independent bottlers are opening their own distilleries to then become distillers. So there's almost this really weird cyclical thing going on. But yeah, I'm a huge fan. Particularly a fan of Douglas Lane. Big fan of Douglas Lane, and also Gordon and MacPhail. Those are two independent bottlers that I know well, and some of my friends work there, so I have nice connections with.
Mm-hmm. Brendan, thank you so much for joining us today. It was such a treat, and it's such inspiring to just hear you speak about whiskey. And I learned so much today about the session, and things I didn't find in anywhere. So thank you again. I hope you have a good time with us. And Old Fashioned, it's my next stop, and I really, really expecting you to come here to Israel to drink whiskey with us. And I hope soon it's gonna happen. And you have something to say to everybody?
I also can't wait to come to Israel. I can't wait to come there and sit down and have some whiskies with you all and have more of a conversation, because I know this has been quite one way. It's been me talking to you and you having to listen, but at least you've had free whiskies to try at the same time. But yeah, I hope everyone's safe. I hope everyone's well, and I hope that this is all over soon and we get to see each other. And yeah, I just wish everyone, I hope everyone's getting some time off at the holidays. I'm finishing work very soon, and I'm quite excited to get some rest, spend some time with my family, and yeah, I'll see you all in 2021.
Brendan, thank you so much. Thank you. And it was such a treat. And I hope to see you soon. I hope to see you soon. It was such a great privilege. Thank you so much. And thank you for everybody for joining us. Brendan, by the way, we got 51 viewers. I know you didn't know the numbers, but 51 fans, new fans you got, and I'm the first one. Remember, I'm your number one fan, always. So thank you again, and I hope everybody have a good time, and see you all soon.
Sure. See you all soon, everyone. Thank you. Thanks, Tommy. Bye.